Now we're going to look at the second way that GDP is calculated, and that is the income approach. So here we're looking at the U.S. numbers for 2018 using the income approach. Now this approach is a little more complicated. Make sure you get good notes on this because you will be calculating GDP this way using the income approach on the exam. First, you're going to calculate what we call national income. And you'll add up 6 different types of income. And I'll go into these more in depth on the next slide. So the national income, this is like the total income in the U.S. So right here, it's 17.6 trillion is what we're looking at right here. Then we're going to make some statistical adjustments. That's the 3 right here. And I'll talk about each one of those and why we make the adjustment in a couple of slides. Once you make the statistical adjustments, you will have GDP, gross domestic product. And if you look back at a few slides ago when we looked at the U.S. numbers for 2018 using the other approach, the expenditures approach, you'll notice that GDP is exactly the same number. Okay, let's dig in. Step 1 in solving for the income approach is calculate national income. There's 6 pieces of national income that you will add together. First, compensation of employees. This is like wages, salaries, benefits. This is what our labor force receives as income. The second one is rents. This is income for landowners. The third one is interest. This is the interest that you'll receive from your financial investments. This is directly linked to capital because businesses tend to borrow money from financial institutions to pay for their capital. Number 4 is proprietor's income. A proprietor is a business owner. So this is like the profits or the income of the entrepreneurs. The 5th piece that we're going to add in is corporate profits. So not all businesses are owned by one or a group of entrepreneurs. All that would fall into proprietors here. Some of our businesses are corporations, and we still want to make sure and count the income that's received from a corporation. A lot of times you'll just be given corporate profits, and you can just add that number in so it counts for all the profits made from the corporation. Now, the corporate profits is actually divided into 3 pieces. So sometimes instead of getting the full corporate profits, they'll give you the 3 separate pieces, add them together, and it will equal your corporate profits. And you can add those in. So these 3 pieces are corporate income taxes. That's the amount that the corporation, of the profit of the corporation, that actually goes to the government. The second one is dividends. That's the profits that are sent out to their shareholders or investors. And the third one, undistributed corporate profits. Those are profits that the business is going to keep and use and spend in the next year or the following years. The last piece we're going to add into national income is taxes on production and imports. And taxes are sort of like income for the government. So this is income that's not going into the pockets of someone, an individual, but instead it's going to the government. We want to make sure and count that as well. So we're going to add in some taxes to our national income as well. Once you've added up those 6 pieces and you get national income, you have 3 adjustments to make to reach GDP. The first thing you will do is you will subtract net foreign factor income. So net foreign factor income just helps us to make sure that the income earned is that within the borders of the United States. So we want to make sure and add in all the income earned by foreigners that was earned in the U.S. and subtract out any income that Americans have earned abroad. And that will do that all in one swoop for you. So just subtract, they'll give you the net foreign factor income. The next thing you're going to do is you will add the statistical discrepancy. So the statistical discrepancy may be positive, then you add it, may be negative, then you just subtract that number. This value actually just helps balance the two different approaches. So the statistical discrepancy is the difference between the amount in the expenditure approach and the income approach. This is how we can make sure that both of the approaches always equal exactly the same number. So even though theoretically they should always be identical, because data collection is not perfect and we lose out on some things. Think about the underground economy we talked about earlier. So we're missing out on a little bit of our economy. That term, the statistical discrepancy that we're adding, just helps balance out any issues we may have had if they don't end up perfectly equal. And this number tends to be pretty small when you compare it to other things in the economy. The last one, we're going to add the consumption of fixed capital. And I mentioned this earlier, this is depreciation. So remember, depreciation is automatically counted in the expenditure approach. It's already a part of gross investment. So it's getting counted in that approach, which means we need to make sure and count it in the income approach so that the two equal each other. So subtract net foreign factor income, add statistical discrepancy, add consumption of fixed capital, and you get GDP. Now, it's your turn to try it. So I've given you a lot of potential different amounts within the economy. You're going to calculate GDP using the expenditure approach and calculate GDP using the income approach. So make sure you have your formulas with you for each one. You actually do have some extra information over here. So don't try to sort these, just look directly at your formula. So for the expenditure approach, you've got C plus IG plus G plus XN. And remember, you've got a little formula to solve for XN. Find each of those pieces over here, plug them in your formula, and you'll get your answer for GDP. Then do the same thing with the income approach. So add up the 6 different pieces to get your national income, and then make the 3 statistical adjustments to that number, and you'll get GDP. And you should get the exact same number for both A and B. So pause the video here and try it, and then I'll go over the answers. First, let's calculate using the expenditure approach. So this is the formula that you need for the expenditure approach, C plus IG plus G plus XN. And remember, XN is exports minus imports. So let's start with C first. So you do need to know what the C stands for. It does stand for consumption, but specifically personal consumption expenditure. So know the full name. So we're going to take this information first. It's the 1810. We'll go into that spot. Next is IG. That's investment or gross private domestic investment. So IG is the 437 plus G, which is government purchases. This is the 577, goes in the third spot. And then XN. So XN is net exports. So you can check your list and see if you have net exports. We don't here. So we're going to need to solve for it. And that formula is exports minus imports. So find the exports on your list. So U.S. exports are right here. 367. Subtract imports. We have imports here at 388. That gives us a net exports of $29. We do this simple math. So put 29 into the last for net exports, and then you just add all 4 of them up. You'll get 2,853, and that is actually in billions, if you notice that here. Now let's solve for GDP using the income approach. We're first going to find national income by adding up the 6 different types of income in the nation. The first is compensation of employees here. So the first term is 1,722. The next is rents. So we have 33 in rents. The third income is interest here at 201. That's our third. The next type is proprietor's income, which came out at 132. The next is corporate profits, and they did give us the total corporate profits, so we can just take that one of 203. Don't worry about the corporate income taxes, the dividends, or the undistributed corporate profits. That's all included in this 203 right here. And then the sixth type of income is taxes on production and imports, the 255. So add together all six. Then we're going to make the three statistical adjustments, which I put on here for you. So first subtract net foreign factor income, which is here. So we're going to subtract 10, then add the statistical discrepancy, which is right here. So add the statistical discrepancy, and then add consumption of fixed capital right here. So add the 307. And when you add all of these together, subtracting the net foreign factor income, you should get 2,853 again. So this is also in billions, and this is exactly equal to what we got when we were using the expenditures approach. I highly recommend memorizing the equation for the expenditures approach because we're going to be using that so often. But when you're calculating GDP using the income approach, just take good notes and you will be able to use those notes on the homework and on the exam. Now we know how GDP is calculated. The next thing we're going to get into is how we adjust GDP from nominal to real.